You wake to the sound of steel scraping against stone. The blade is being sharpened somewhere below your window, each stroke deliberate, methodical, final. You can smell the Thames mud and rot mixing with incense smoke drifting from the chapel. Your hands won't stop trembling, not from cold, but from knowing. In 4 hours, that blade will separate your head from your shoulders. The hammering outside has been going on for an hour. They're building something. Each strike of the mallet echoes through your bones like a countdown. Your ladies move through the chamber like ghosts, their faces pale, their hands shaking as they dress you in gray, damask, and white. Even in death, he chooses what you wear. But what they were building wasn't what anyone expected. I'm always amazed this story reaches from Tokyo to Sao Paulo. Drop a comment from wherever you're watching this unfold. The Tower of London, May 19th, 1536. A fortress that has stood for 5 centuries, its stones soaked in blood and secrets. This morning, it will witness something that has never happened in English history. Something so unprecedented that foreign ambassadors will write about it for decades. A woman waits in rooms she once occupied as a queen. The same tapestries hang on the walls. The same river view stretches beyond her window. But everything has changed. 3 years ago, she entered these chambers in triumph, preparing for her coronation. Now she's preparing for her execution. She is not yet 30 years old. She has a daughter, not yet 3. And in less than 4 hours, she will become the first crowned Queen of England to be executed. Her crime, that depends on who you ask. Before dawn, someone made a choice that doomed 5 men. A letter written in terror would surface centuries later, changing everything historians thought they knew. And the weapon being sharpened in the courtyard below was unlike anything England had ever seen. But what happened in the 17 days before this morning broke every rule of justice they thought they knew. The nightmare began on May Day, 1536, not with evidence, not with discovery, with a single arrest that sent shockwaves through Greenwich Palace. Henry Norris was the king's closest friend, his groom of the stool, a man who had access to Henry VIII's most private moments. They were celebrating spring together, watching jousters compete, laughing at court gossip. Then Thomas Cromwell whispered something in the king's ear. Within an hour, Norris was in chains. The charge, adultery with Queen Anne Boleyn. The evidence, he had been seen talking to her. He had received gifts from her. He had been present at court events, where she was also present. Norris refused to confess, even when promised his life would be spared, even when shown the instruments of torture waiting in the tower. He maintained his innocence with a steadfastness that suggested either remarkable courage or genuine truth. But Cromwell didn't need his confession. He already had someone else's. 4 days earlier, a young musician named Mark Smeaton had been taken to Cromwell's house in Stepney. What happened in those rooms was never officially recorded, but when Smeaton emerged, he was ready to confess to adultery with the Queen, ready to provide specific dates, specific locations, specific details. A man with everything to lose had suddenly admitted to a crime that guaranteed his death. The question nobody asked publicly was simple. What did they do to him? William Brereton was arrested on May 4th. Francis Weston followed on May 5th. Both were gentlemen of the King's Privy Chamber. Both were accused of the same crime-secret affairs with Queen Anne, conducted under the noses of the entire court. The speed was intentional. 5 arrests in 5 days, each one more shocking than the last. No time for allies to organize. No time to mount a defense. No time to even comprehend what was happening. But the final arrest was different. It crossed a line so monstrous that even hardened Tudor courtiers recoiled in horror. On May 2nd, George Boleyn's younger brother was arrested and charged with incest with his own sister. The crime was so beyond the pale of acceptable behavior that it served a specific purpose. It made Anne not just an adulteress, but a creature so depraved that no punishment could be too severe. And it ensured that anyone who spoke in her defense would be seen as supporting something unnatural, something evil, something that couldn't be discussed in polite company. The cruelty of it took everyone's breath away. But that was the point. Anne was arrested immediately after watching a tennis match at Greenwich. She had been sitting in the stands, observing the king play with Francis Weston, the same man who would be arrested 3 days later as her alleged lover. She laughed when they first read the charges to her, not from joy, but from the sheer impossibility of it all. 5 men, secret affairs conducted in a court where her every movement was watched, recorded, analyzed by dozens of eyes. Then they told her about her brother. The laughter died in her throat. The color drained from her face. Witnesses recorded that she began to speak rapidly, almost frantically, as if words could somehow stop what was happening. She asked to see the king. She was denied. She asked to see her daughter. She was denied. The journey to the tower took her through streets where she had ridden in triumph just 3 years before. Then crowds had thrown flowers. Now they watched in silence. Some crossed themselves, others simply stared. When the barge pulled up to the tower's water gate, Anne reportedly broke down. She fell to her knees on the steps and begged God to help her if she was guilty. Then she stood, straightened her gown, and walked inside with the bearing of a queen. Sir William Kingston, the tower's constable, was instructed to record everything she said, every word, every gesture, every moment of weakness or strength. His reports reveal a woman cycling between defiance and despair, between regal dignity and raw terror. But they also reveal something else, something that haunted Kingston until his death. Anne kept saying the king would show mercy, that their marriage meant something, that their shared history, the years of courtship, the break with Rome, the daughter they made together would count for something in the final calculation. She genuinely believed Henry wouldn't kill her, even as they built the scaffold outside her window, even as she heard them testing the wood, arranging the straw, even as the sound of steel being sharpened drifted up through the morning mist. She believed in a mercy that didn't exist, in a love that had already died, in a man who no longer remembered who she had been to him. The tragedy wasn't just that she was innocent, it was that she died still believing in him. The trials began on May 12th. All 4 commoners, Norris, Brereton, Weston, and Smeaton, were tried together in Westminster Hall. The proceedings lasted hours, but the verdict was never in doubt. The evidence was gossip elevated to testimony. A servant claimed she saw Norris bow too deeply to the Queen. Another reported that Anne had given Weston a gift. Someone else swore they heard suspicious laughter coming from a closed room. Smeaton's confession remained the cornerstone of everything, but even that was problematic. He was a musician of modest birth who depended entirely on royal favor. The idea that he would risk death for an affair with the Queen stretched belief to the breaking point. 3 of the 4 men maintained their innocence, refused to confess, even when offered mercy. They went to their deaths swearing they had done nothing wrong. George Boleyn's trial was held separately due to his noble rank. He defended himself so eloquently that observers noted the jury seemed genuinely uncertain. For a brief moment, it appeared one person might escape. Then George made a fatal mistake. He was shown a written question told only to read it silently to himself. Instead, he read it aloud to the entire court. The question concerned King Henry's alleged impotence, his inability to satisfy Anne sexually. Information so damaging that it sealed George's fate regardless of guilt or innocence. By speaking those words aloud, he had humiliated the king before the entire court, and Henry never forgave humiliation. On May 17th, 5 men died on Tower Hill. Mark Smeaton went to his death, maintaining his guilt perhaps from genuine remorse, perhaps from a mind broken by torture. The other 4 proclaimed their innocence to the end. George Boleyn's final speech was noted for its dignity. He stood on the scaffold and spoke of his faith in God, his love for his sister, and his certainty that the truth would eventually emerge. Then the axe fell. 5 times. 5 men dead for crimes that may never have happened. Anne, locked in her rooms, would have heard the crowds gather, would have heard the sound carry across the tower grounds, would have known that men had died because of their alleged relationships with her. The psychological torture of that knowledge is almost unbearable to contemplate. Anne's trial was held on May 15th in the Great Hall of the Tower itself. Her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, presided as judge. Family loyalty meant nothing when weighed against survival. The charges were read with specific dates and locations. October 6, 1533, at Westminster with Norris. November 8, 1533, at Westminster with Brereton. The precision was meant to lend credibility. Instead, it revealed fabrication. Court records show Anne was either pregnant or recently delivered during many of these alleged encounters. The physical impossibility didn't matter. The legal proceeding wasn't about truth. It was about providing cover for what was already decided. Anne denied everything, spoke in her own defense with a firmness that impressed even her enemies. But she had no legal counsel, no ability to call witnesses, no power to challenge testimony from people who weren't even present in the courtroom. The verdict came quickly, guilty on all charges. The sentence, death by burning or beheading, at the king's pleasure. But here's what history often omits: the detail that makes everything even worse. The very day before Anne's trial, Archbishop Cranmer declared her marriage to Henry null and void, invalid from the beginning. Based on the king's previous relationship with Anne's sister Mary, think about that. Henry was simultaneously claiming Anne was guilty of adultery within their marriage and that no valid marriage had ever existed. The logical contradiction was stunning in its cruelty. By declaring the marriage invalid, Henry made Anne's execution legally unnecessary. If they were never truly married, she couldn't have committed adultery against him, but he killed her anyway. And by bastardizing their daughter Elizabeth in the process, he erased Anne's legacy while she still lived. Everything she had fought for, the break with Rome, the religious reforms, the position she had clawed her way toward, all of it was rendered meaningless. With a stroke of a pen, Henry had made an unusual decision about Anne's execution. Instead of the traditional English axe, he imported a swordsman from Calais. The method was presented as a mercy. The French sword was supposedly quicker, more reliable than the brutal English blade. But it served another purpose. It distanced Henry from the act itself. It made Anne's death seem cosmopolitan, civilized, almost dignified, and it prevented any English executioner from refusing the task or developing sympathy for the condemned queen. The morning of May 19th arrived gray and misty. Anne rose early. Having slept little, she chose her clothing carefully, dark gray damask with white beneath, mourning and purity combined. A silent statement about her innocence that she couldn't speak aloud. Her hair was arranged to expose her neck. Practical considerations even in death. She took communion, ate a small breakfast of bread and wine, and listened to the sounds outside. The crowd gathering, the scaffold being tested one final time. She asked Sir William Kingston about the executioner's skill. Kingston assured her he was very good. "I have heard he is the best," she replied, "and I have only a little neck." Then she laughed that same inappropriate laughter that had emerged when first hearing the charges. The walk to the scaffold was short, but infinite. Through courtyards where she had once walked as queen, past buildings where she had exercised royal authority, the same stones, the same walls, everything familiar yet transformed by context. The crowd fell silent when she emerged. The sight of a queen walking to her death was unprecedented. Shocking. Even hardened spectators seemed unable to process what they were witnessing. Anne mounted the scaffold with steady steps. She delivered her speech, asking for prayers, expressing loyalty to the king, accepting the judgment passed upon her. What's most striking is what she didn't say. She didn't proclaim her innocence directly, didn't attack Henry or the court that condemned her. Whether that restraint reflected acceptance, political calculation to protect Elizabeth, or simple exhaustion remains unknown. She removed her headdress and jewelry, placed them in her lady's hands. They blindfolded her with white cloth, a mercy that would spare her the sight of the approaching blade. Then she knelt, maintained her posture, maintained her dignity even at the very end. The executioner approached with silent steps. The sword was longer than expected, thinner, designed for a single precise stroke. He raised it, brought it down in a movement so swift that many in the crowd missed it entirely. Anne Boleyn's head was severed from her body with one clean cut. The crowd's reaction was stunned silence, followed by gasps, prayers, murmured conversations. Some crossed themselves, others simply stared. The reality of what they had witnessed, the execution of a crowned queen, was overwhelming. Her ladies gathered her remains with trembling hands, wrapped everything in white cloth, performed their final service with tears streaming down their faces. But there's one more thing historians discovered centuries later. Anne's burial was as hurried as her trial. Her body was placed in an old elm chest that had once contained bow staves. No coffin, no ceremony, no monument. She was interred in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the Tower grounds, alongside the men who had died as her alleged lovers. For 300 years, her grave remained unmarked. When Queen Victoria ordered renovations to the chapel in 1876, workers discovered human remains beneath the choir floor. Among them, the bones of a slender woman, aged 25 to 30, with a small, delicate neck. Modern forensic analysis suggests Anne may have been pregnant at the time of her execution. Not far along, perhaps only weeks, but enough that she might not have known herself. The examiner noted something else in his official report, something that still chills historians who read it today. The vertebrae were severed with absolute precision. The executioner truly had been an expert at his craft. "You're back where we started," preyed on darkness. The sound of steel being sharpened, the smell of river mud and incense. But now you know why the hammering continued through the night. Now you understand why Anne's hands wouldn't stop trembling. 11 days after her execution, Henry married Jane Seymour. He wore white, the color of mourning in royal tradition, but also the color of celebration. He had finally gotten what he wanted: a fresh start, a compliant wife, a clean slate. But history had other plans. The daughter he bastardized and abandoned the child whose legitimacy he destroyed to justify her mother's execution would become Elizabeth I, one of England's greatest monarchs. The woman Henry killed in his desperate pursuit of a male heir would be remembered through the daughter whose legitimacy he denied. The Tower of London still stands today. The chapel where Anne was hastily buried has been renovated, beautified, marked. Her grave now has a proper memorial. Tourists visit by the thousands, and if you walk through the Tower grounds on a gray morning in May, some say you can still hear it: the rhythmic scraping of stone against blade, the countdown to oblivion, the sound that announced the end of one of history's most tragic chapters. The ghost of Anne Boleyn has been sighted more than any other spirit in the tower. Always wearing gray and white, always walking toward the chapel, always carrying her head under her arm. Maybe she's still searching for the mercy she believed existed. Or maybe she's making sure the world never forgets what power can do to innocence when dressed in the language of justice.